Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Reading Corner with MooseChangerPat.
That's me, in case you're wondering.
Today we are reading Chapter 27 of Queen of Sorcery by David Eddings, and as always, you should support the original work by buying the original book. Chapter 27. They were in a long hallway of some sort. Garion could see the flagstone floor quite clearly. 3 men were carrying him face down, and his head bobbed and swung on his neck uncomfortably. His mouth was dry, and the thick, sweet smell that had impregnated the cloth they had crushed to his face lingered. He raised his head, trying to look around.
"He's awake,"
the man holding one of his arms said. "Finally," one of the others muttered. "You held the cloth to his face too long, Issus."
"I know what I'm doing," the first one said. "Put him down."
"Can you stand?" Issus asked Garion. His shaved head was stubbled, and he had a long scar running from his forehead to his chin directly through the puckered vacancy of an empty eye socket. His belted robe was stained and spotted. "Get up," Issus ordered in a hissing kind of voice. He nudged Garion with his foot. Garion struggled to rise. His knees were shaky, and he put his hand on the wall to steady himself. The stones were damp and covered with a kind of mold. "Bring him," Issus told the others. They took Garion's arms and half dragged, half carried him down the damp passageway behind the one-eyed man. When they came out of the corridor, they went in a vaulted area that seemed not so much like a room, but rather a large roofed place. Huge pillars covered with carving supported the soaring ceiling, and small oil lamps hung on long chains from above or sat on little stone shelves on the pillars. There was a confused sense of movement as groups of men in varicolored robes drifted from place to place in a kind of languorous stupor. "You," Issa snapped at the plump young man with the dreamy eyes. "Tell Sadi, the chief eunuch, that we have the boy." "Tell him yourself," the young man said in a piping voice. "I don't take orders from your kind, Issus." Issa slapped the plump young man sharply across the face. "You hit me," the plump one wailed, putting his hand to his mouth. "You made my lip bleed, see?" He held out his hand to show the blood. "If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'll cut your fat throat," Issus told him in a flat, unemotional voice. "I'll tell Sadi what you did." "Go ahead, and as long as you're there, tell him that we've got the boy the queen wanted." The plump young man scurried away. "Eunuchs," one of the men holding Garion's arm spat. "They have their uses," the other said with a coarse laugh. "Bring the boy," Issus ordered. "Sadi doesn't like to be kept waiting." They pulled Garion across the lighted area. A group of wretched-looking men with unkempt hair and beards sat chained together on the floor. "Water," one of them croaked. "Please." He stretched out an imploring hand. Issa stopped to stare at the slave in amazement. "Why does this one still have his tongue?" he demanded of the guard who stood over the slaves. The guard shrugged. "We haven't had the time to attend to that yet." "Take time," Issus told him. "If one of the priests hears it talk, he'll have you questioned. You wouldn't like that." "I'm not afraid of the priests," the guard said, but he looked nervously over his shoulder. "Be afraid," Issus advised him, "and water these animals. They're no good to anybody dead." He started to lead the men holding Garion through a shadowy area between 2 pillars, then stopped again. "Get out of the way," he said to something lying in the shadows. Grudgingly, the thing began to move. With revulsion, Garion realized that it was a large snake. "Get over here with the others," Issus told the snake. He pointed toward a dimly lighted corner where a large mass seemed to be undulating, moving with a kind of sluggish seething. Faintly, Garion could hear the dry hiss of scales rubbing together. The snake, which had barred their way, flicked a nervous tongue at Issus, then slithered toward the dim corridor. "Some day you're going to get bitten, Issus," one of the men warned. "They don't like being ordered around." Issus shrugged indifferently and moved on. "Sadi wants to talk to you," the plump young eunuch said spitefully to Issus as they approached a large polished door. I told him you hit me. Moss is with him.
Good, Issa said. He pushed the door open. Sadi, he called sharply, tell your friend I'm coming in. I don't want him making any mistakes.
He knows you, Issus, a voice on the other side of the door said. He won't do anything by mistake. Issus went in and closed the door behind him.
You can leave now, one of the men holding Garion told the young eunuch.
The plump one sniffed. I go when Sadi tells me to go.
And come running when Sadi whistles, too.
That's between me and Sadi, isn't it?
Bring him in, Issus ordered, opening the door again.
The two men pushed Garion into the room.
We'll wait out here, one of them said nervously.
Issus laughed harshly, pushing the door shut with his foot, and pulled Garion to the front of the table, where a single oil lamp flickered with a tiny flame that barely held back the darkness. A thin man with dead-looking eyes sat at the table, lightly stroking his hairless head with long fingers of one hand. "Can you speak, boy?" he asked Garion. His voice had a strange contralto quality to it, and his silk robe was a solid crimson rather than vari-colored. "Could I have a drink of water?" Garion asked. "In a minute."
"I'll take my money now, Sadi," Issa said.
"As soon as we're sure this is the right boy," Sadi replied.
"Ask it what its name is," a hissing whisper said from the darkness behind Garion.
"I will, Moss." Sadi looked faintly annoyed at the suggestion. "I've done this before."
"You're taking too long," the whisper said.
"Say your name, boy," Sadi told Garion. "Daroon," Garion lied quickly. "I'm really very thirsty." "Do you take me for a fool, Issus?" Sadi asked. "Did you think any boy would satisfy me?"
"This is the boy you told me to fetch," Issa said. "I can't help it if your information was wrong."
"You say your name is Daroon?" Sadi asked. "Yes," Garion said. "I'm the cabin boy on Captain Greldick's ship. Where are we?" "I'll ask the questions, boy," Sadi said.
"It's lying,"
the sibilant whisper came from behind Garion. "I know that, Maz," Sadi replied calmly. "They always do at first."
"We don't have time for all this," the hiss said. "Give it Orit. I need the truth immediately."
"Whatever you say, Maz," Sadi agreed. He rose to his feet and disappeared momentarily into the shadows behind the table. Garion heard a clink and the sound of water pouring. "Remember, this was your idea, Moss. If she becomes angry about it, I don't want to be the one she blames."
"She'll understand, Sadi."
"Here, boy," Sadi offered, coming back into the light and holding out a brown earthenware cup. No thank you," Garion said. "I guess I'm not really thirsty after all." "You might as well drink it, boy," Sadi told him. "If you don't, Issus will hold you, and I'll pour it down your throat. It isn't going to hurt you."
"Drink," the hissing voice commanded.
"Better do as they say," Issus advised. Helplessly, Garion took the cup. The water had a strangely bitter taste, and seemed to burn his tongue. "Much better," Sadi said, resuming the seat behind the table. "Now, you say your name is Daroon?" "Yes." "Where are you from, Daroon?" "Sendaria." "Where exactly in Sendaria?" "Near Dareen on the north coast." "What are you doing on a Cherik ship?" "Captain Greldick's a friend of my father," Garion said. For some reason, he suddenly wanted to explain further. "My father wanted me to learn about ships. He says that being a sailor is better than being a farmer. Captain Greldick agreed to teach me what I need to know to be a sailor. He says I'll be good at it because I don't get seasick, and I'm not afraid to climb up the ropes and hold the sails in place, and I'm almost strong enough to pull an oar already, and—" "What did you say your name was, boy?" "Garion, Daroon. Yes, Daroon, and—" "How old are you, Garion?" 15 last Aristide. Aunt Paul says the people who are born on Aristide are very lucky, only I haven't noticed that I'm luckier than—" "And who is Aunt Paul?" "She's my aunt. We used to live on Fowler's farm, but Mr. Wolf came and we—" "Do people call her something beside Aunt Paul?" "King Furlak called her Pulgera. That was when Captain Brendig took us all to the palace in Sendar. Then we went to King Endheg's palace in Val Alorn, and—" Who's Mr. Wolf? My grandfather. They call him Belgarath. I didn't used to believe it, but I guess it has to be true because one time he... And why did you all leave Falder's farm? I didn't know why at first, but then I found out it was because Zadar stole the Orb of Alder off the pommel of the sword of the Revan King, and we've got to get it back before Zadar can take it to Torak and wake him up and... This is the boy we want, the hissing voice whispered. Garion turned around slowly. The room seemed brighter now, as if the tiny flame were putting out more light. In the corner, rearing out of its own coils and with a strangely flattened neck and glowing eyes, was a very large snake. We can take it to Salmisra now, the snake hissed. It lowered itself to the floor and crawled across to Garion. He felt its cold, dry nose touch his leg, and then, though a hidden part of his mind shrieked, he stood unresisting as the scaly body slowly mounted his leg and coiled upward until the snake's head reared beside his face, and its flickered tongue touched his face. Be very good, boy, the snake hissed in his ear. Very, very good. The reptile was heavy and its coils thick and cold. This way, boy, Sadi told Garion, rising to his feet. I want my money, Issus demanded. Oh, Sadi said almost contemptuously, that. It's in the pouch there on the table. Then he turned and let Garion from the room. Garion, the dry voice that was always been in his mind, spoke quietly to him. I want you to listen carefully. Don't say anything or let anything show on your face. Just listen to me. Who are you? Garion asked silently, struggling with the fog in his brain. You know me, the dry voice told him. Now listen. They've given you something that makes you do what they want you to do. Don't fight against it. Just relax and don't fight it. But I said things I shouldn't have. That doesn't matter now. Just do as I say. If anything happens and it starts to get dangerous, don't fight. I'll take care of it. But I can't do it if you're struggling. You'll have to relax so that I can do what has to be done. If you suddenly find yourself doing things or saying things you don't understand, don't be afraid and don't try to fight. It won't be them. It will be me. Comforted by this silent reassurance, Garion walked obediently beside Sadi the eunuch, while the coils of the snake Maz lay heavily about his chest and shoulders, and the bluntly pointed reptilian head rested, almost nuzzling, against his cheek. They entered a large room where the walls were heavily draped and crystal oil lamps hung glittering on silver chains. An enormously stone statue, its upper third lost in the shadows high above, raised its mass titanically at one end of the room, and directly in front of the statue was a low stone platform, carpeted and strewn with cushions. Upon the platform stood a heavy divan that was not quite a chair and not quite a couch. There was a woman on the divan. Her hair was raven black, cascading in loose coils down her back and across her shoulders. About her head was an intricately wrought golden crown, sparkling with jewels. Her gown was white and spun of the flimsiest gauze. It did not in any way conceal her body, but rather seemed to be worn only to provide a material to which her jewels and adornments could be attached. Beneath the gauze, her skin was almost chalky white, and her face was extraordinarily beautiful. Her eyes were pale, even colorless. A large gold-framed mirror stood on a pedestal at one side of the divan, and the woman lounged at ease, admiring herself in the glass. 24 shaven-headed eunuchs in crimson robes knelt in a cluster at one side of the dais, resting on their haunches and gazing at the woman and the statue behind her with worshipful adoration. Among the cushions at the side of the divan lolled an indolent, pampered-looking young man whose head was not shaved. His hair was elaborately curled, his cheeks were rouged, and his eyes were fantastically made up. He wore only the briefest of loin-cloths, and his expression was bored and sulky. The woman absently ran the fingers of one hand through his curls as she watched herself in the mirror. "The queen has visitors," one of the kneeling eunuchs announced in a sing-song voice. "Ah," the others chanted in unison. "Visitors." "Hail, eternal Salmisra," Sadi the eunuch said, prostrating himself before the dais and the pale-eyed woman. "What is it, Sadi?" she demanded. Her voice was vibrant and had a strange dark timbre. "The boy, my queen," Saudi announced, his face still pressed to the floor. "On your knees before the serpent queen," the snake hissed in Garion's ears. The coils tightened around Garion's body, and he fell to his knees in their sudden, crushing grip. "Come here, Moss," Salmisra said to the snake. "The queen summons the beloved serpent," the eunuch intoned. "Ah!" The reptile uncoiled itself from about Garion's body, and undulated up to the foot of the divan, reared half its length above the reclining woman, and then lowered itself upon her body, its thick length curving, fitting itself to her. The blunt head reared up to her face, and she kissed it affectionately. The long forked tongue flickered over her face, and Moz began to whisper sibilantly in her ear. She lay in the embrace of the serpent, listening to its hissing voice, and looking at Garion with heavy-lidded eyes. Then pushed the reptile aside. The queen rose to her feet and stood over Garion. "Welcome to the land of the snake people, Belgarion," she said in her purring voice. The name, which he had heard only from Aunt Paul before, sent a strange shock through Garion, and he tried to shake the fog from his head. Not yet, the dry voice in his mind warned him. Salmisra stepped down from the dais, her body moving with a sinuous grace beneath her transparent gown. She took one of Garion's arms and drew him gently to his feet. Then she touched his face lingeringly. Her hand seemed very cold. "A very pretty young man," she breathed, almost as if to herself. "So young, so warm." Her look seemed somehow hungry. A strange confusion seemed to fill Garion's mind. The bitter drink Saadi had given him still lay on his consciousness like a blanket. Beneath it he felt at once afraid and yet strangely attracted to the queen. Her chalky skin and dead eyes were repellent, yet there was a kind of lush invitation about her, an overripe promise of unspeakable delights. Unconsciously he took a step backward. "Don't be afraid, my Belgarion," she purred at him. "I won't hurt you, not unless you want me to. Your duties here will be very pleasant. I can teach you things that Polgara hasn't even dreamed of." "Come away from him, Salmisra," the young man on the dais ordered petulantly. "You know I don't like it when you pay attention to others." A flicker of annoyance showed in the queen's eyes. She turned and looked rather coldly at the young man. "What you like or don't like doesn't really concern me anymore, Essia," she said. "What?" Essia cried incredulously. "Do as I say at once." "No, Essia," she told him. "I'll punish you," he threatened. "No," she said, "you won't. That sort of thing doesn't amuse me anymore, and all your pouting and tantrums have begun to grow boring. Leave now." "Leave?" Essia's eyes bulged with disbelief. "You're dismissed, Essia." "Dismissed? But you can't live without me. You said so yourself." "We all say things we don't mean sometimes." The arrogance went out of the young man like water poured from a bucket. He swallowed hard and began to tremble. "When do you want me to come back?" he whined. "I don't, Essia." "Never?" he gasped. "Never," she told him. "Now go and stop making a scene." "What's to become of me?" Essia cried. He began to weep, the makeup running down his eyes, running in grotesque streaks down his face. "Don't be tiresome, Essia," Salmisra said. "Pick up your belongings and leave, now. I have a new consort." She stepped back up on the dais. "The queen has chosen a consort," the eunuch intoned. "Ah," the others chanted. "Hail the consort of eternal Salmisra, most fortunate of men." The sobbing young man grabbed up a pink robe and an ornately carved jewel box. He stumbled down from the dais. "You did this," he accused Garion. "It's all your fault." Suddenly, out of the folds of the robe, draped over his arm, he pulled a small dagger. "I'll fix you!" he screamed, raising the dagger to strike. There was no thought this time, no gathering of will. The surge of force came without warning, pushing Essia away, driving him back. He slashed futilely at the air with his little knife. Then the surge was gone. Essia lunged forward again, his eyes insane and his dagger raised. The surge came again, stronger this time. The young man was spun away. He fell and his dagger clattered across the floor. Salmisera, her eyes ablaze, pointed at the prostrate Estia and snapped her finger twice. She so fast that it seemed almost like an arrow loosed from a bow. A small green snake shot from beneath the divan, its mouth agape and its hiss a kind of snarl. It struck once, hitting Essia on the leg, then slithered quickly to one side and watched with dead eyes. Essia gasped and turned white with horror. He tried to rise, but his legs and arms suddenly sprawled out from under him on the polished stones. He gave one strangled cry, and then the convulsions began. His heels pattered rapidly on the floor, and his arms flailed wildly. His eyes turned vacant and staring, and a green froth shot like a fountain from his mouth. His body arched back, every muscle writhing beneath his skin, and his head began to pound on the floor. He gave one thrashing, convulsive leap, his entire body bounding up from the floor. When he came down, he was dead. Salmisra watched him die, her pale eyes expressionless, incurious, with no hint of anger or regret. "Justice is done," the eunuch announced. "Swift is the justice of the Queen of the Snake People," the others replied.